her well, but she's currently a professor in the School of Education at Stanford University. And she got her doctorate from Stanford. And in the intervening period, she went to the University of Michigan to be a professor. Now, I noticed that, Arnetha, you're a person who must like to stay put somewhat, because she got 2 degrees from the University of Michigan earlier, and she went off to Stanford, then she went back to Michigan where she got those degrees, and then she went back to Stanford where she got her other degrees. So I like that. That's very good. And of course, they're 2 fabulous institutions, so they were lucky to have Arnetha, and Arnetha was lucky to have them. She is the current president of the American Education Research Association. She's been extremely active in the association. She was a vice president earlier, and she's been active in some other regards. And they recognized her scholarship by making her a fellow, which is a program they initiated 2 or 3 years ago. So she has been very active in and recognized by AERA. In fact, she got the Palmer O. Johnson Award for the highest quality of academic scholarship published in an AERA journal for the 2009 year. So that's quite a prize. Congratulations on that. She has published 2 books and edited several volumes, and she's written some very influential articles, and she has a book coming out, an ERA volume, Studying Diversity in Teacher Education, so we can look forward to that. When's that going to be out?
Just came out.
It just came out. Well, rush right down to the bookstore and get one. That's what I say. But she is a very accomplished scholar who is passionate about urban education, preparing teachers for urban education. She was a scholar of literacy, writing, and so it's a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you. Oh, I should have said she also was in the schools as a teacher and speech therapist and the like for quite a few years as well. So she knows what she's talking about from an experiential point of view as well. I apologize for not mentioning it.
No problem. Thank you so much, Andy, for that introduction. And it is a pleasure to be here with each of you this afternoon. I wanted to begin by saying good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've certainly noticed that the headlines, newscasters, the news headlines, Twitter, conversations on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere else as we look around, remind us, confirm and reconfirm that we are indeed living in exciting times. But they certainly also remind us that we are living in challenging times. And this thing keeps coming up with a message.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As I said, when we look at the news, when we pay attention to Twitter, Facebook, which I've been trying to stay away from because I get almost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I know all of you are getting emails a day, which we can't keep up with, so I'm not ready for Facebook. I peek at it every now and then, and I'm certainly not about to get into Twitter. But the conversations that are going on remind us that we're living in exciting times, but we're also living in challenging times. And the crises that are happening one after another, it seems to be happening quicker and quicker. You know, another tsunami, another earthquake somewhere. I don't know if they're happening more often or if they're just reporting them. more thoroughly. But there's concern about the crises that are just facing us day after day on a regular basis. When we think about these crises that are flashed on the television screen in front of us, help us to think about the fact that how we perceive and how we respond to these crises can really disappoint us, or they can renew our hope in the fact that the species will survive. We can rise to the occasion, we can address these problems and these crises. And so when I think about these crises, let me give you a couple of the ones that came to my mind as I was preparing this presentation. First one, of course, comes to everybody's mind is 9/11. All right, so we look at 9/11, we watched time after time as the towers just, I didn't believe it. I thought my husband was, when he said, turn on the television, I was in another part of the country, and I didn't believe what I was seeing before my eyes. A crisis in the American context that had never happened before. But we remember the ashes, the reaction of the people, unbelievable in terms of the crisis that was facing us. But in the midst of that crisis, we also heard time and time again about how individuals were rising to the occasion to help one another, to find innovative ways to address the crises and what we were going to do about it. And looking at the heroic acts that were taking place gave us hope. People were being very generative in their thinking, innovative in their thinking to help one another, and it gave us hope in humanity and where we can go. We think about the AIDS. It's a crisis. Maybe out of sight, out of mind, but if you think about it and you look at it closely, we're in the midst of a crisis, and that's a worldwide crisis. Now, we can be depressed and, or we can try to look at it from other perspectives. What do we do within the midst of this crisis? How do we respond? And I thought about one example. I do work for the last decade in South Africa, and there's definitely also a crisis there. And it came to my attention, the case of the Chikambusu Women Orphan Project. You have these children, many, many, many children, walking the streets of South Africa with no mother, no father. Perhaps an older brother or sister is trying to raise a younger brother or sister. And there's so many. You're concerned about the future of society as we know it. But within the midst of that crisis, we have this project where it started out with one widow and her 7 orphan children trying to be innovative and thoughtful and creative within the midst of that crisis. And within 3 years, that project had grown to 60 widows and 30 single mothers and over 300 school children, in which they came together as families and worked together to try to create a non-traditional family for many children, one adult, female and male, coming together to work with these children to be able to provide them with a stable environment, a caring and loving community that they could be a part of and could develop as productive human beings within a society, whether or not it's non-traditional or not. And as part of this project, they looked around innovatively and saw trash, these plastic bags laying around everywhere. They even got a thing in South Africa. You have to pay for your plastic bags. That's happening here too now, okay. But I was shocked last time someone said, do you want to put this in a bag? And I said, sure, I want to put it in a bag. Oh, okay, that'll be a nickel extra. A nickel. Anyway, but they're picking up these plastic bags and they are turning them into artistic projects. And they're selling these projects to interested individuals, and they're building schools for the children. They're building schools, homes, communities where there is a sustained place of love and education for these groups of children. And so in the midst of the crisis again, we see innovation, generative thinking, and a response that is hopeful. The last example I will give you is recent earthquakes that have been happening all over the world where, we're shocked. Oh my God, another crisis is going on. Things are falling apart. But I thought about it when I looked in the case of Haiti. In the midst of the crumbling buildings, individuals were thinking innovatively. And they were going back to these crumbled shops, and they got some of their supplies, and they came back to the villages or communities where people were living, and they were creating little companies. People would come in and they would get their nails done, and a little spa right in the midst of the rubble. These trying times for people, people were thinking generatively and innovatively in terms of meeting the needs of people, of individuals, making snow cones that lift the spirit of the young children, and this one making, using artistic abilities to do things like paint the buses that are getting people from here to there, and this one really got me, what will we do without our cell phones? And what do we do when they run out of power? Well, what do you do for power in the midst of following an earthquake? Some ingenious individual took the crisis and saw it as an opportunity for innovative thought, generative thinking, and hope, where entrepreneurial spirits were being rewarded. When we look deeply and we look closely at the crises with a discerning eye, we see seeds of innovation, generativity, and hope within the midst of a crisis. How we look at each crisis makes all the difference in the world. If you're in the midst of this crisis, you can look at things as they have always been, or you can think creatively and generatively about how we might change things as we currently know them. And this is absolutely necessary. When we look at the issue of education in the United States for too many individuals, it's a crisis situation. We have a crisis situation for poor, marginalized, urban, many children in this country. Dropout rates are just too high. Too many students are starting as freshmen, and they're certainly not ending up there at graduation. And so individual lives that could be contributing to our society are not being able to fully live out the potential that they have to contribute to our society. For example, when we look at the California context, we see that in 8 public schools in the United States, we see that the demographics are changing rapidly throughout the state, and it's happening throughout the country. We're getting more and more majority-minority states. The demographics are changing, whether we want to admit it or not. But the sad thing is, within these changing demographics, where we see students of color, marginalized, poor students, we're finding that in California, 50% of the students are Latino, and where 50% of the students live in low-income families. Many, at least 25%, I would say it's higher than that right now, are English language learners. And whereas California was at one time #1 in the nation in terms of the school system that we had to offer, ranked 41 in per pupil expenditure, and that's going lower since these statistics. Schools are marked by high rates of segregation, resegregation of schools. 87% African American students and 90% of Latino students attend many schools in urban areas. What's going on with these demographics? When we look at the segregated schools, we see that the school demographics, 58% of the schools, percentage of schools that offer a sufficient number of AP classes for the students in those schools. We find that AP courses in schools that have a high number of African American students, I can't see over there and it's not showing up here, they have high percentages of insufficient enrollment in AP courses, and less than 20% of the teachers who are teaching the AP courses are not qualified to teach them. This is happening in case after case in schools, and the higher the percentage of students from African American and Latino backgrounds, the fewer AP classes are offered, and the higher the percentage of teachers who are unqualified to be teaching these courses. Within these segregated schools, we're finding that achievement and graduation rates are dismal. Only 24% of African Americans and 22% of Latino students are completing school with AP requirements. And we know why. The teachers aren't qualified, they aren't offering the courses, compared to 56% Asian and 39% white students who are completing schools and starting into college with the AP, backgrounds, higher level of training in these classes. Only 55% of Latinos and 56% of African Americans are graduating from high school within these segregated schools, and compared to 78% white who are graduating from high school. These statistics are indications that a crisis does indeed exist, at least for some students. Schools are working for some students. They work very well. We know what to do to educate kids successfully. But in too many schools with particular types of demographics, those kinds of educations are not available for the students. In the midst of this crisis in the United States in 2008, 52 million students were in K-12 education. That's a lot of students. Some people see these as opportunities for jobs for people who have lost their jobs in other segments of society. So when you look at statistics and see 3,476,000 kindergarten, elementary, and middle and secondary school teachers that were needed in 2008, and we realize that in 2018, these are probably low statistics, 3,900,000, let's say 4 million teachers, that's jobs for individuals, are going to be available in the teaching profession. Now, some people see this as an opportunity to employ lots of people who are currently unemployed. Others see it as a cause for concern to bring, to see classrooms as opportunities to place individuals who can't find a job elsewhere. When you see that nearly 1/3 of the United States population in 2005 were people of color, and that the fastest growing populations in the United States are Latino, American, Asian, and Pacific Islander. Those are the percentage of those. This is the growth. These are the growth populations in the United States. And then when we look over to even African American and white, these are not growing nearly as fast as these populations of color. These are the populations that are populating our urban schools. And in these urban schools, we see conditions of poverty, low teacher quality, high incidences of not fully qualified teachers in those classrooms, language barriers between teachers and students, literacy rates that are very low, although these students are capable of learning. We know they are capable of learning, but that by 2020, over 50% of U.S. public school pupils will be classified as students of color. A growing incidence of minority states and schools within these urban areas. At the same time, some challenges are facing teacher education. Across national boundaries. I do work in the United States and South Africa over the last more than a decade, and just left Australia, have been looking in Canada, First Nations, education of First Nations populations in Canada, as well as New Zealand, and the patterns are replicating themselves. So when we're talking about what's going on here, it's not just the US, it's not a ghetto, it's not a just inner city problem. It's not just a national problem for the United States. It's a global issue that teacher education programs are dealing with teacher shortages. Teachers who were going into the teacher education programs I was teaching at in South Africa, even though they were given full bursaries, tuition to go to school, into teaching, they're saying, the traditional teachers are saying, I don't want to do it. It's too much work for what I'm being paid, too much stress. I'm not interested in going into these classrooms that are very different from the classrooms that I bought into, that I was a part of myself. Things are changing too quickly for them. Growing student enrollments. Class sizes are getting larger and larger. Increasing expectations on the part of standards. Schools, society are demanding more from classes, from schools, and changing standards on a regular basis. I was working with NCATE certification at a particular university, and it's phenomenal how much time the teachers or teacher educators are spending trying to address the standards that's being put before them. They're spending more time trying to meet the standards than teaching in the classrooms. High stakes testing. Pass them, it could mean a whole change in the trajectory of your life chances for where you're going to end up in this society. Low student test scores. Look closely at the test and you might understand why. High dropout rates. And some kids are being pushed out of school because of the low test scores. It's like, if you left, we might do better on our test scores. And the pipeline from schools into prisons is also, as we all know, an area for concern. And violence and issues of safety within urban schools. All of these are challenges that are not just facing us here in the United States, but globally. And we're trying to address these problems, and we need to think about them rather than trying to pass them on and blame them on certain segments of our society. So when we think about challenges in the areas of preparing teachers for 21st century schools, we must realize that these challenges can no longer be pushed on to certain populations. It's their fault. They aren't doing a good job. It is a societal problem. And that old African proverb that it takes a village to educate our kids, we're all going to have to be invested, not in seeing how much money we can make from the production of tests or curriculum, but truly educating our students to function, not just to pass a test, but to function and to contribute to society. And we can no longer ignore. We can continue if we want. My husband told me about, same thing with education. He was talking about Social Security. And the analogy was given about an individual who went to the doctor, and he said, I have some bad news. You have cancer, and it's terminal. And you have two options. One option is you can try chemo and other treatments that we have a potential to try to help you with this cancer. You might be able to beat it, but it's very long, very tedious, and very painful. There's another option that's available to you. You can pass it on to your 2-year-old grandson, and then you won't have to deal with it. So we think about economic situation within this country. We might have to make some painful decisions. Think generatively, outside of the box, and look at things not as they're going to go back to where they used to be, but that we need to be thinking in generative and innovative ways about addressing the economic issues for this country and the educational issues for this country. We can either stand up and deal with the painful issues that stand before us, or we can pass them on to the next generation. How we deal with this crisis will tell whether we will survive as a country, as a society, perhaps as a species. So in the United States, we're concerned about the fact that most of the teachers, now here's some statistics or some interesting phenomenon about teachers' feelings of preparedness to go into 21st century schools in the following areas. 41%, only 41%, felt well prepared to implement new methods of teaching. Only 36% felt prepared to implement the state or district standards, felt ready to go in and do what was being demanded of them in these areas. Only 25% felt prepared to integrate technology into classrooms. My 4-year-old grandson knows more about how to work this computer than I do. He's really intuitive. He's got it down pat. But teachers are not going into most classrooms ready to deal with the preparedness that the students are ready to be innovative and do some different things with technology. And so only 25% are feeling really prepared to go in and use the tools that are now available to us. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm concerned because less than 20% feel prepared to go in and address needs of limited English proficient students and students that are filled with students from diverse backgrounds. That's a pretty low percentage. Schools of education and teacher education programs are being indicted because we're not doing a good job. But with those kind of figures, we have the growing incidence of diversity in classrooms, and more teachers are going into those classrooms admittedly feeling that they are not prepared to deal with the 21st century issues that will face them as they go into the classrooms. And so we need to address these challenges that are persisting for poor and marginalized students across national boundaries, which include, of course, the opportunity gap, to be able to have an opportunity to learn what they need to learn to function in today's society. Issues of excellence and equity in funding and other areas within the school are definitely an area of concern. And the equity and excellence is certainly not a reality for all of our students. Segregation and poverty in our schools, the digital divide, and access to knowledge in these schools. These are challenges that we can no longer ignore. And in the midst of these challenges, we can begin to conceptualize new visions. We must conceptualize new visions about how we are going to address the challenges that are before us. The same old ways of passing the buck are not going to work for us. And I'm saying, and I'm proposing, and we have some, change the curriculum, do this, these micro issues that need to be changed in classrooms. But on a macro level, in teacher education, I am proposing that we must create teachers or develop teachers who have a sense of generativity in terms of their thinking, innovation, and a sense of efficacy as they go into the classrooms that are awaiting them. And the question is, how do we do that? The article that Andy referred to, the 2009 article that won the Palmer O. Johnson Award, talked about the reality with changing demographics. Make us think about the fact that we have to look at the resources and the possibilities that students are bringing into the classroom, and that they're going to have to be faced with issues of going into culturally and linguistically complex classrooms. Many teacher education programs are preparing teachers to go into monolingual, monocultural classrooms, content pedagogical knowledge. If you know the content that you're going in to teach, that should be good enough, and you can adapt it to the student populations that you're dealing with. I'm saying that one of the pillars of what we need to be including in our teacher education program is the preparation of teachers to work with diverse students, how to motivate them, how to understand them, how to move forward with what will be in front of us as we go into these classrooms. No scripted curriculum can tell you how to do that. You must be ready to go in and to take the knowledge that you have and to use them in generative, innovative ways, and you must have a sense of efficacy. Some of the research that I've been focusing on for more than the last decade focuses on one of society's greatest challenges, and certainly one of teacher education's greatest challenges. And that is the preparation of teachers to teach in culturally and linguistically complex classrooms. However, before we can envision changes that need to take place, we need to look and see, as we think about appropriate solutions, we must come to some consensus about the direction for change. And we must take account of what we know, so that we can build on and plan relevant and appropriate directions for change. So here's some of the things that I think we agree on that we know. Now, as Vice President of Division K, what I noticed, we were really criticized heavily in teacher education about small-scale idiosyncratic studies that talk about one classroom and one study that directly contradicts another study. And no wonder policymakers may not be listening very closely to what we have to say, because all they have to do is look in another journal and we'll find a different answer to our question that we're researching. But I believe we as a research community must come to some consensus about what we know that we know, and put that forward and begin from those points to think generatively about where we need to go from there. Okay, so here's a couple of things that I feel like we know that we know. Now, I think most of us agree that there is an opportunity gap, some refer to as achievement gap, in our schools. But when we ignore issues of unequal funding and access in schools, do we really believe what we say that we know? We know that there's an opportunity gap, and there's a consistent, persistent achievement gaps based on test scores. But we don't want to deal with the issues of funding. Equitable funding for all classrooms. We know what we know, but we're not acting on what we know. We can't agree on how to address these issues. We know that we need highly qualified teachers in every classroom, particularly complex classrooms. Yet, we don't even know how to define highly qualified teachers. Let's get real. I think we know, but we are not admitting that, consistently to our benefactors. Most of us agree that good teachers are underappreciated and underpaid. We agree on that, don't we? Maybe we don't. Well, I do. I feel that every teacher in a classroom who's doing any kind of a job, doing a good job, educating kids, needs approximately 3 times the salary that they are currently being paid. It makes a difference. Because if you tell me class size doesn't matter, salaries of teachers don't matter, I'm saying you're living in a fairy tale world. And an incentive of a couple of $1,000s for you instead of you is not a solution to that problem. My daughter finished law school. She refuses to tell me how much she makes because she doesn't want to make me feel bad after a couple of decades of working in education. And you know what? I'm not pushing her for an answer because I'm feeling pretty good about myself right now, and I don't want to know that my 30-year-old daughter is making more money than I am. So that's just me, in higher education. But in classrooms where kids need somebody who's working many more hours to do a good job, they deserve to be paid and appreciated. Anybody who doesn't agree with that, we'll talk offline about it. Okay? There was a headline that I read. Now, if we're paying them peanuts, what do we think we're going to get from them? Teachers. You get just what you deserve from most teachers because you're underpaying them. Teachers in Oakland every year get a pink slip. They don't know if they're coming to work in September. And they may not be if they're permanent teachers because it's cheaper to hire somebody that you don't have to give benefits to. That's ridiculous. And so when you get the situation that you have in Oakland schools, you're getting just what you're paying for. And you're saying you don't understand why? The test scores, the achievement of students, the opportunity gap, the futures of these students are as they are. I think we understand. We say that we care about equity and excellence. Most of us agree about that. But in reality, we don't agree that everyone deserves it. You don't have to say that out loud to me. You have to answer that for yourself. Does every child deserve a quality education? An equitable education? One of the kids I know went to an elite school in Michigan. My goodness. What was available to those students was outstanding. And one parent who wanted her student to get a particular award that year donated a swimming pool and natorium, is that what they call it? Yeah. Oh, and she did get the award. But the resources at that school, I won't mention it, they are unbelievable. There's no question about what to do with those students to get every single one of them into Harvard, Yale, Stanford. It's not that we don't know what to do. We just don't believe that every child can or should have it. Nor do we agree on the approaches we need to use to ensure that equity and excellence is available to all. Now, if we didn't go to the moon, ladies and gentlemen, and I do believe we went, although some people question that, we can solve this problem if we have the will to solve the problem of education for all kids in America. We all agree that education is not funded at the levels that it should be in order to ensure quality education and quality teachers for all students. But most of us too busy ensuring our own jobs and our next grants or securing our jobs to risk what we have to fight for equitable salaries and funding for schools for all kids. You know, who was it? Frantz Fanon that said, without struggle, there is no progress. We have to be willing to struggle and give up some of our creature comforts if we want to make a difference in education for all kids. Maybe there's another way. I'm interested in finding out what that is. We agree that we need data-driven decision-making in education, but we don't agree on how to focus our research efforts to get that data base so that we can address the critical challenge that's facing us. You know, what we know that good teachers do matter, and that the benefits of good teaching are accumulative over time. We know that. Statistics show it. Experience shows it. You've been in classroom with good teachers, and they've usually been there at least for a little while. Knowing that, we can't agree that low-income schools have the rights to have teachers that are there on a long-term basis. We're telling the kids, the schools, everybody that it's okay to bring in teachers who are proven that they're only going to be there 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years at the most. Statistics are showing that these teachers are not staying in these classes. What does a student feel who has not had a teacher for a full year since they've started school? Substitute teachers, changing teachers in the middle of the year. How is that child valued? And how do we expect that child to perform at school? The messages that we send tell what we really believe. We agree that university-based accredited programs are no longer the exclusive providers of teacher education and certification for teachers, and that more than 1/3 are new teachers in California, New Jersey, Texas are entering in teacher education programs from alternative programs. Now that's not a bad thing if they're good programs. So they're increasingly popular, but we know that the quality of some programs vary, and that's university-based as well as alternative programs. And so we can't just sell the whole cow. We need to look at which parts are good and push for those parts that are good. We still don't know which elements of a teacher education program contribute most to teachers' ability to produce student learning. Why don't we have that research? It should be pretty clear. Well, one thing, teacher education funding is underfunded, generally speaking. And the work that needs to be done is not done. Many teachers leave teaching in their first 3 years. Most teachers, we know, are white, female, monolingual, and they make it very clear, to teach in schools where most of the students are white, monolingual, middle class, or above. Teacher turnover is highest, we know this, in schools with low salaries and poor working conditions. We know that. Yet, these kinds of schools continue to exist in what used to be the richest country in the world. Can't say that anymore. And we seem to agree that most teacher education programs are not succeeding at preparing teachers to be effective teachers in culturally and linguistically complex classrooms. These are things that we know. Zeichner has said that There are a couple of things in the book that just came out. He wrote and he said that we need to be connecting individual studies to one another in programs of research. So we can put these idiosyncratic, small-scale, single studies together. What knowledge can we pull together from what we know from these small-scale studies, individual studies? Within communities of researchers in ways that enable the accumulation of knowledge over time. We need to do that. And we need to design research in ways that reflect the complexity of what is being studied. This issue of preparing teachers for diversity and for teaching in culturally and linguistically complex classrooms is complex. And so the research that we are doing needs to be high quality and very complex in its design, in its implementation, and what we do with the research after we found what we found. So some keys to solving the puzzle that I have dedicated my life to. One of it is, as I said, the last decade, I've been working on a cross-national study on preparing teachers to work with diverse teacher population. And here's a couple of the research questions that have sustained my work over the last decade. How do our discourses about teacher education, about the kids that we're teaching, about teacher educators, how do these discourses function to preserve, promote, or to challenge the social reproduction of the quality of schools in society that currently exists? So we're reproducing, we're doing the same old thing over and over again, and our discourses are reflecting what we're doing, the same old thing with a little bit of a tweak. We're tinkering around the edges, because to change it also threatens our centers of comfort. Another question that sustains my work is how can we help teachers and students to develop the awareness and counter narratives that attribute to liberation and equity in education? How do we help to develop that awareness and these counter narratives within schools? And how can we facilitate the construction and reinforcement of new power relations that can be used by educators and by students alike to resist, to redefine, and to possibly redirect this current crisis that we find ourselves in? How can we facilitate it? All right? What I wanted to say here simply stated that we need to change the low level of teaching and student outcomes that is occurring for poor and urban students. We must first change the attitudes and the dispositions of the teachers and the teacher educators who are working in these areas. That's the first step. Not content knowledge, but the attitudes and dispositions. And before we can begin to hold high expectations for student achievement, teachers have to believe that the students have the ability to achieve at these high levels. And that's all efficacy. Do I believe that I can make a difference in the lives of every one of the students in my classroom? And quite frankly, that is not the case in many of the classrooms that I've been spending time in. And so I build my work on a couple of theoretical perspectives. I build on the work of Bakhtin, that talks about, changing perspectives, teacher change and development, and how do we get to the core of these attitudes, dispositions, and feelings of efficacy. And so I draw on the work of Bakhtin and Vygotsky, Gramsci, Freire, and several others. I use writing as a pedagogical tool. to help teachers to think, and teacher educators, to think deeply about the issues that we're talking about. And I propose that the act of inscription, the act of writing and thinking to create and transcribe in a written form allows the opportunity for people to think in different ways. And so I use writing as a pedagogical tool in my teacher education program. And it's a valuable tool. It's a dying art, too. And my hypothesis is that the impact of our effectiveness will be evident in teachers changing discourses about the work that they're doing, but that's not enough. It will be evident in the practices that are taking place in classrooms across the country over time. Now, the research methods, data collection, I have multiple, and I'm a discourse analyst and a linguist, by training. And so autobiographies, the voices of the teachers, narratives of their memorable learning experience, reflective writing, critiques of the theory that they're exposed to in my courses, interview data, audio tapes, analysis of that, transcripts of small group discussions, videotapes of their teaching over time, and write-ups of their action research that they're doing out in the field, the time that they're spending with populations of students who, when they come into the teacher education program, they're totally unfamiliar with. They have not spent time in these communities, nor have the teacher educators. Many of them send their lone graduate student who feels comfortable going into these communities to go out and collect data, and then, the analysis takes place and the write-ups and research appear. But the action research, going out into these communities, working over time in communities and understanding the kids, the communities, the resources that exist there, changing perspectives about the resources that are there and how to build upon them is a part of the work, that I've been doing. And I've been documenting that through Action Research Project and through these other ways, and most importantly, through longitudinal data collection. So you can't go in one time and write about what happened in that class that day, or twice. But it's been a decade of longitudinal studies of going back and talking to teachers and saying what made the difference in your teacher education program that impacts your commitment, your sense of efficacy, their practices, and what you do beyond the classroom that contributes to the life and the learning of the students that you're working with. So the longitudinal nature of the research is really important. The research methods include narrative analysis, content thematic analysis, linguistic analysis, critical discourse analysis, and from all of that analysis, this model has emerged from looking closely at the data. So what I find that I need to do, and taking you someplace, in the teacher education program, because I believe, remember, we're working toward changing attitudes, changing ideologies, changing thinking, and a development of a sense of agency and pride in being able to work with students from diverse backgrounds. So I begin here with reflective work. The raising of the metacognitive awareness of teachers about literacy, language, learning, and education in their own lives and in the lives of the students with whom they may have very little familiarity. We do analyses of media. Let's just look at some of the movies that you see on education. Where did these images come about inner city kids in classrooms? Did anybody see the opening scene of Dangerous Minds? who the heck wants to go teach there? I mean, you know, and it's kind of hard to change these images if you've been bombarded with these images, these news articles over time, and this is what you really believe, and it may be subtle what we believe. And so we must become metacognitively aware of what we believe, what we think. We must be reflective, and this is a phase of awakening on the part of the teachers. All right? So after they've become metacognitively aware of the role of language, literacy, learning, and education in their own lives and the lives of their students, there's an awakening. There's an awakening that takes place in the part of the teachers. This next, we start dealing with ideological becoming as defined by Bakhtin. We look introspectively at the personal involvement of these teachers in terms of embracing or rejecting the information that they're exposed to. It's a safe zone. You don't have to accept it all, but think about it, take a stance, and take on a sense of agency. What do you believe? You know? What do you think, what you believe, and look introspectively about the role that you play in this whole endeavor. And a safe zone to talk about it and be real. After that, we go to a stage of critique. Internalization, according to Vygotsky, where we do action research, lots of projects and works out in the field to begin to perceive what is the need for change in education as it currently exists. We critique what the literature says, and we develop, once we take a stance, a sense of advocacy on what it is we say we believe, and we begin to plan what we want to do about it. And in the fourth stage, we move to a stage of generativity, applying knowledge continuously to the problem solving and ongoing learning on the part of these teachers, lifelong learning, and a development of voice. McElroy Johnson says, how can teachers help students develop a sense of voice if they themselves don't have a voice of their own? And if a teacher is willing to go into a classroom and accept a scripted curriculum that they themselves don't believe that this is the best thing for the students in their classroom, do they in fact have a voice of their own? Do they have a stance? And do they have a sense of efficacy about what needs to be done in the classroom where they are? Now, once they develop this voice of their own, this sense of efficacy, they begin to act on it in their own classroom in generative ways. They may realize that the theories or what they've been told in the curriculum doesn't work in this particular classroom. And so they have to go into the classroom and get to know the students, take the knowledge that they've learned, the life experiences that they've had, go in and get to know the students in these culturally and linguistically complex classrooms, think generatively and innovatively about how to meet the needs of the students in our classrooms. So it's not about can you fulfill this list of tasks, but do you know the basic knowledge and can you move beyond it in terms of meeting the needs of the students in whatever classroom you find yourself in? And if you're not, then you need to maybe move on to another classroom. That's okay. But making that decision is important. I moved to another stage since that model as I realized, how do we develop these teachers who go through these stages of development if teacher educators themselves haven't gone through these stages? They have not been out in the classrooms. They don't know how to tell teachers or to model for teachers how to work with diverse student populations because they themselves have not been out in these classrooms, or nor do they feel comfortable or a sense of efficacy in working with. So the teacher educators need to be educated so that they can help to educate the teachers. Now, I found out something really important beyond teacher educators is we need organizational theory to build on, because organizations called universities and teacher education programs have to be learning organizations. They have to become relevant to the needs of 21st century classrooms. And so if the organization is not invested in changing and addressing the needs of 21st century classroom, you come in and you challenge your students in your classroom to think about these hard issues of race, ethnicity, linguistic diversity, what to do with students who aren't doing well in your classroom, the outliers, the hard questions that we need to deal with while we're in the safe comfort of teacher education program. You do that, and you're pushing your students, and then those who run your organizations say, you didn't get good teacher evaluations because that work was hard and teachers struggled in your classroom and you did not get good evaluations. Well, I didn't expect to. You know, this is hard work, you know, and a lot of teachers don't come back until years later to thank me for the work that they had to engage with as a part of this course and a part of the teacher education program. So the learning organization has to be intact first. The teacher education program must be a learning organization to support the teachers, educators in modeling the kind of practices, ideologies, and they themselves must be innovative, creative, generative thinking. They must model that for their students. The students then in turn model it for the candidates within their teacher education programs. Those candidates go out into the schools and they model it for their students in their classroom. No, you're not going to just fill in the blank, fill in the bubble. You are going to think. And you are going to apply these issues to issues within your community that are important and that you are passionate about. And once you get students thinking generatively, they impact their communities, and then the communities begin to change and demand better education in their communities and in their schools, and then those communities in turn impact the teacher education programs. So, we have an ecology of impact, and it happening at just one level is not enough. It needs to be happening at all of these levels. And so the next thing, now that we have this model, here it is, where do we go next? Where do we go next? Moving beyond the model of generative change, what I've been able to do is just take a little break from where I was to go to a context where I had the opportunity to be the inaugural Barbara A. Sizemore. You know Barbara A. Sizemore, you know, she was quite a lady. She was a lady ahead of her time in terms of issues of educating students of color. So to be the distinguished professor of urban education in that context was a wonderful and invigorating experience. Within that context, I was able to work with administrators, faculty, and staff who were willing to be a part of a learning organization. And we're developing principles to go out into the schools and be ready to receive the teachers that are currently in our pre-service teacher education program. And what's exciting about Duquesne, this is Pennsylvania. Yeah, it's an undergraduate teacher education program. California does not have an undergraduate teacher education program. You get 1 year, after, that's not enough time to do what really needs to be done to prepare teachers. So with 4 years, and I just happen to have a 4-part model, we've been working on metacognitive awareness, getting out into those schools understanding where these preconceived notions about the kids have been coming from, reevaluating them. Ooh, we just having a good time, you know, with these kids and going to community-based organizations and working with kids and change perspectives about, wow, these kids can learn and I can make a difference in their lives and they are making a difference in my life. And so we are working with administrators who are going to be the principals. Now we're working on the pre-service teachers who are graduating from the teacher education program with a specialization in preparation to teach in urban schools, the urban teacher education program. And there's an in-service program as well. So we have the principals program, we have the pre-service teacher education program, we have the in-service teacher education program, because there are many teachers within the schools who want to teach kids better. They need help. And so we're going in with programs about how to support and to help and to scaffold and to give them the resources that they need, you know, to be able to do a good job in these classrooms. And finally, the pipeline program. We just had 46 graders, sixth graders on the campus, you know, learning about issues of what it's like to be in college, what the teacher education program might be about, you know, and the excitement of visioning a future that they might be a part of that can make a difference. But that is not just the sixth graders. There is a, what is it, the one where special art, special science, special, what do you call this? Magnet. It's a magnet school that has a program in teacher education. And we've been going in, working with a group of people who have decided as juniors and seniors that they want to be teachers. Now, this is an inner city, urban school. They have experienced quite recently, you know, it's right at the forefront of their mind, what it's like to be in urban schools, and they certainly have a voice about what needs to be done to make urban schools better. And so we're working with these to be our next generation of urban teachers, and it's not enough to just put the passion in them. We're working on scholarships and funding to bring them into that university so that they can get the money that they need to finish the program and hopefully go back into, so we're growing our own next generation of urban teachers. And so there's a lot, there's so much that needs to be done, you know, and making a difference in these schools is not just a job. It's a calling, you know. And as you might see, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm kind of passionate about it. So every teacher that leaves my classroom, you know, not everyone is passionate, but they've certainly engaged with some important issues. They have to engage. And if we can plant the seeds, they may germinate at any time, you know, in terms of what the possibilities are for making a difference in urban schools. And I can tell you right away, all of the teachers, all the people who take my classes are not going to end up being teachers, but they will be lawyers, they will be doctors, they will be entrepreneurs, they will be community workers, and they are going to be advocates for the change of what's going on in our urban schools. And so I wanted to bring your attention to this new volume, that another thing that we do, we can't just work from one avenue. You got to work at every avenue. And so the book that's just been produced by AERA and Rowan and, what is it? Littlefield. And Linda Darling Hammond says in the preface that it's dealing with diversity, that dealing with diversity is one of the central challenges of the 21st century schools and 21st century education. And in fact it is. And in this book, what we've done is something a little bit different. You know, there was some seminal books that came before it studying education, studying teacher education. Conklin Smith and Zeichner, and it's a fabulous book, and probably everybody has a copy, but you might notice that there's a chapter on diversity. Okay, and of course, there's some weaving throughout the book of issues of diversity, but there could be volumes and volumes on studying diversity in teacher education. Now, there's a lot of research on studying multicultural, education, or studying diversity in education, but not bringing the two together on studying diversity in teacher education. And so this book has 3 sections. It talks about where we've been with historical information by leaders in the field, like Carl Grant, is Sonia in this section? Let's see, Carl Grant, Valerie Payne, Rich Milner, Christine Sleater, Etta Hollins. What is the historical? Where have we been? What do we already know? Some of the persisting challenges that are facing diversity in teacher education. The middle section comes from young folks. These folks that are breaking new ground and talking about theoretical perspectives and issues of pedagogy and research that is groundbreaking. That every teacher educator and every educator who's going to be working with diversity in teacher education need to be thinking about. And there could have been 10 more chapters. And then finally, the final section talks about an agenda for where we need to be going. And so, I don't think you can get one today, because I tried to get some extras for a signing that I was going to do next week, and they all sold out. But you can order them. But we need to think about these issues, about the research that needs to be done and how we act on that research to make a difference in the lives of kids who are falling through the cracks and got to do something different from what we've been doing. So we're facing this by bringing together the research on diversity and research on diversity in teacher education programs, which is a silent dialogue in many teacher education programs. And so I told you about the 3 parts, and so I'm just going to close. It's time to close. It's time to close with a challenge and an invitation to you. Now, I don't know really who's in the audience, but I'm assuming that we have some professors, we have some students, a diverse group in this audience. And I'm proposing that innovation, generativity is critical. No, you can't just take what you're given. You got to take that to the next level in these classrooms that are not predictable. And and learn from the kids what you need to know in order to meet their needs. All right? And you must develop a sense of efficacy about your ability to change the lives of these kids. All right? So in the midst of the crisis, I think about a narrative by Toni Morrison. And in her Pulitzer Prize acceptance speech, she said something that's really stayed on my mind for a long time. In her speech, she shares a narrative. And the narrative talks about an old woman. The old woman, she's blind, but she's wise. And some young people come to her to visit her. They stand before her, and one of them says, "Old woman, I hold in my hand a bird. Tell me whether this bird is dead or is it alive?" As you may recall, you may have heard it, this was a powerful speech. The old woman who was visited by these young children and she was asked this question by the children. You want to think about, well, who are these children? Who are these young people? And I think of them as interrogating voices of critical thinking
intellectually rigorous faculty, teachers, researchers, students, you, the group in this audience, who stand continually in the face of the academy and interrogate and ask the question, what are we going to do? Are we going to continue tinkering around the edges, doing just a little bit different, but maintaining the status quo because we can afford to lose some children? Or are we going to do something different? Well, they're asking the question of the academy. Is teacher education, is this bird dead or is it alive? Because I guarantee you, when you look at teacher education 10 years from now, it's going to look different than what it looks right now. Because if it doesn't, it's going to face the life of School of Education at Chicago, or what's going on in Arizona. You know, doesn't look good. We got to do something different. Is the bird dead or is it alive? And so this woman in her wisdom, as you may recall, she doesn't respond immediately. She thinks for a while and she realizes, you know, if I say it's dead, they're just going to say, hey, we're wrong. Here it is. If I say it's alive, they might, whatever. So she doesn't answer right away. But then she speaks. She says, I don't know. I don't know whether the bird you are holding is dead or alive. But what I do know is that the bird is in your hands. The bird is in your hands, folks. And what I'd like for you to consider today is the fact that the bird that's in your hands, you as scholars, future teachers, teacher educators, and members of society at large need to think about, are we going to continue with business as usual? Will we tinker around the edges? Or are we going to work to develop teachers who think generatively, innovatively, that we're going to create programs that are generative and innovative and that produce efficacy in ourselves, that we believe we can make differences in the lives of all kids, and that our teachers can make a difference in the lives of kids, and that the students that we are educating can make a difference in society. And if we believe that we can make a difference in the lives of our poor, our marginalized, and our disenfranchised populations, then we can face this crisis in ways that it has not been addressed before. And so I leave you with the challenge. The bird is in your hands. Thank you.
We have time for 2 or 3 questions, I think.
So you mentioned this briefly, and I wanted to ask this question before you even mentioned it. I went through a 4-year teacher education program. I came out feeling extremely prepared and confident as a teacher. And I had someone who, we were talking about, you know, the sort of TFA model and of, you know, of traditional or extinct 4-year model, right? And so the interpretation was that everyone feels unprepared when they first start the classroom. And I said, well, that wasn't the case for me, right? And so I wanted you to just talk a little bit more about why you think you need more time. What are some of the elements that you need to develop over time that you can't get in this, you know, in a 1-year program?
I had the same experience that you had. I went into the class, I was ready. I started tutoring my nephew at 8 years old, you know. So I knew I was going to be an educator, all right? And I knew I was pretty good at it, you know. And it was a part of who I was and what I wanted to do to make a difference in the world. So some people are ready. you know. But most of the teachers, we talked about the demographics of most teachers going into these urban classrooms. Most of them are white and female and monolingual and not feeling confident or prepared. They have preconceived notions based upon what is being flashed at them continually within our society about these populations. And I'm just glad to be given time, because I've been in programs where most of the teachers in the teacher education program are receiving counseling because they're stressed out. There's so much information that teachers need to be able to do a good job, and so many experiences that they need. And so I'm not saying that you can't have a good teacher, but my feeling is probably a rarity. That's what I found. It's a rarity to find the teacher who can, and I know some dynamite people who have had 6 weeks of preparation and gone into a classroom, and oh my God, they just could not handle what was there. Now, I believe that, and I'm also kind of wondering, I mean, there's some innovation and there's some good ideas going on in 6-week programs or 1-year programs, because I'm feeling the same way about 1-year programs, you know, because no matter what you give, there's more. There's so much more that teachers really need to engage with to go in feeling prepared, who have come from such different backgrounds and experiences. And these are the growing classrooms and populations that we need to be addressing and teaching. And so I think it's going to take some time for most teachers, okay? And even those who can go through a 6-week program and be outstanding teachers, and if in fact that is a reality, why doesn't our society send those fabulous teachers to elite schools? I think it's great. But what's great for these kids ought to be great for these kids. And so society has a problem. So I'm not indicting any program. I'm indicting the whole way we're looking at, you know, this whole problem. And I am just delighted to have the time with these individuals who are just basking. They're taking the time to read deeply, you know, the books and the articles that they're being exposed to. They have gone out to community-based organizations. They have gone out to inner city classrooms, and my goodness, you can see the look on their eyes like, wow, this is a good school. Kids are learning. They're attending. They're on task. You know, they need time to have some experiences, to do research, you know, teacher research, action research projects, you know, to develop. And that doesn't mean that they aren't doing some other things on the side. Because I think, like I said, I started at 8 years old, tutoring. And I did education throughout. And a lot of people do. So I didn't start teaching the day I went into my first class. I started. Now, for those who didn't start with these communities, and these students don't have from 8 to 24 years of age, you know, to get prepared to go into those classrooms. And so they need maybe the 4 years from good teachers, good experiences, to be challenged, to be pushed, to develop, to thrive, and to go in truly with a sense of efficacy about what the possibilities are for these kids, for these schools, for these classrooms, and ultimately for our society.
Thank you for today. And on that note, I was just thinking when you mentioned these schools are working for some students. I think in a way we have a world in which schools are so segregated.
Yes.
Really, they can't be working for some students because those students are going on to reproduce and perpetuate these norms. And also, as we see in an increasingly culturally and linguistically diverse country, those assets are not being shared among all students. So I just often think, and I'm a current pre-service teacher, that framing the need for extensive training and consideration of justice and that difficult work that you talk about happening in the classroom. And it's reminiscent to me, Bell Hooks talking about in Teaching to Transgress, how students would say, this was a difficult experience, and then years later would come back to her. I think that needs to happen in programs that are not just designated as urban programs.
Absolutely.
I just so often see teachers who sort of say, well, that's nice, but these aren't the schools that I want to work in, so those kids, you know.
I've heard that over and over and over again.
And I think, and I just think so much that needs to, that difficult work needs to happen for all pre-service teachers, and then that process that you were talking about can happen hopefully for all students in all schools, so we can increase that appreciation for access and opportunity and diversity for everyone.
And I agree with you 100%. And see, you just thought outside the box. I wasn't just talking about, but definitely this, because this is where our crises. And so we need to, every teacher, needs to struggle to think about, because you really don't know where you're going to end up as a teacher. You need to be prepared, to be a good teacher for every classroom. And that's this new paradigm, and no longer will teaching be thought of as this, you can't do anything else you could teach, or do that until you find out what you want to do in life. It is, just one of the most, I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't do anything else but teach. I love it, and I highly recommend it for those who have what it takes. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.